Hello, everyone, and either welcome or welcome back to the Jen the Libertarian podcast. If you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and on my Patreon page where you do get early access to my episodes. Link will be down in the show notes. Well, this was one hell of a week, but we made it through it. Very, very hyper-condensed. A lot of information put out there this week, mainly because, well, the two things that mainly happened were the Democratic debates, which I do a whole episode doing Democratic debate roundup. So if you did miss that, go one episode back. Democratic debates, I always give their own episode to. And the other thing that happened this week, obviously, in case you've been living under a rock, impeachment hearings. Lots of impeachment hearings. All the impeachment hearings. So much impeachment hearings. I don't know what else there is left to say after this week, but the House Intelligence Committee wrapped up their hearings this week, which they were trying to do, and the reason why everything was just so, hyper packed into this week is they were trying to get everything done before going on Thanksgiving break. Obviously, Congress will not be in session this next week, so they were wanting to get all of their hearings, all of their testimony on the record before Thanksgiving break. So it feels like everybody and their mama testified in front of the Intelligence Committee this week. I honestly, I think it's like pushing 40 hours of testimony that was given over this past week. On top of trying to keep up with the Democratic debates, it's been a long week. And I'm looking forward to next week, hopefully being somewhat lighter, hopefully, because it's Thanksgiving week. But anyway, I'm not going to every little bit of impeachment hearing testimony from this past week, because obviously we would be here for ages. But there are some highlights I wanted to hit, especially the ones that people were really kind of looking forward to seeing exactly how this was going to go down. And the first set of hearings, for lack of a better term, because it's a lot, there were so many people they were trying to question that there were times when they were questioning two at a time. They were doubling up on people actually testifying at the same time to try to get all of this done in 1 week. So first set, we had Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Jennifer Williams, which Jennifer Williams, not super well known before this point in the story, but she is an aide to Mike Pence. And I think the reason they had both of these two testify together is that they were both on the infamous July 25th phone call. So they have firsthand knowledge. They were actually listening in on the phone call as it was happening. And this is, first off, one of the reasons why everybody was so curious to see what these two had to say, is because we are dealing with people who had firsthand knowledge of what was said on the call. So you get the questioning, and I mean, obviously, if you know anything about what was said behind closed doors in the skiff, there's nothing really new here. But Vindman did make a point that when he made the call notes, because he made the call notes for the July 25th call, that the topic of rooting out corruption was actually part of the call prep notes, but that the topic writ large never came up on either the April phone call or the July phone call, which I think is a very important point, because this is kind of hinging on one of the Republicans' defense of all this, is that this was a ask for an investigation into corruption. And Vindman pointed out that no, that was never actually brought up. The only things that were brought up were the CrowdStrike DNC server theory thing. That still blows my mind. I still don't know what to say about that. And also just specifically Burisma and Hunter Biden. There was no discussion of corruption writ large. So yeah, and it was there as part of the prep notes as something to have been brought up, but was not brought up. So what to make of that? You be the judge. But that was our first round of testimony. And it kind of set the tone for what we ended up watching for the rest of the week, which was obviously Adam Schiff and Democrats asking substantive questions about what happened? What did you know? Like, what did you do? Did you report this to your superiors? Who did you tell? Who did you not tell? And for what it's worth, both Vindman and Williams did express concerns to their respective people to whom you express concerns to. So this was something that even just like in the immediate aftermath of the July call, there were people who were like, whoa, wait, this is not okay. Like, nope, this is bad. Nope. So there was that. And the Republicans basically never really engaged with any of the substance of what really any of the witnesses testifying were saying. It was more attacking the witnesses on whatever grounds that they thought that they could attack somebody on. And especially in Vindman's case, some of that got really vile, to be completely honest, because if you don't know Vindman's backstory, his father brought him here from Ukraine. They escaped the Soviet Union, and he's been here. I mean, he's a U.S. citizen, obviously. He's in the military. He's a lieutenant colonel, well-respected, well-liked. But there were lines of questioning that were basically asking if he had dual loyalties, because apparently Ukraine at a couple of different junctures offered him the job of defense minister, which he promptly refused and reported it to his superiors that the offer was given and that he said no. So it's trying to kind of paint this as him being like a double agent of sorts, which is really just incredibly just a really gross thing to say about anybody, but especially about somebody who escaped the Soviet Union. Like, that's not a charge you lay on somebody like that. Like, that's just not okay. But it kind of set the tone for how Republicans were planning on handling these witnesses. And a lot of it came down to basically trying to smear the witness, which, I mean, I should have known, obviously. I mean, everybody should have known. But I was hoping that maybe there would be a little bit of engagement on the substance of what these people were testifying to and not just trying to discredit the witness, because that leaves the door open to say that basically nobody's really refuting the facts as stated. So, not really the best strategy, I don't think. But Vindman's testimony also gave us what has to have been the absolute stupidest controversy of this whole thing, and that is the fact that he wore his dress uniform to testify. Mind you, he is a member of the U.S. Armed Forces. He's there in his capacity as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces giving testimony to a congressional panel. What the fuck else was he supposed to wear? Like, what do you people think dress uniforms are for? They're not for fighting in the theater. They're not for training. They're not for sitting around your house. They're not for anything other than situations like this where you're appearing as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces in an official setting. You're supposed to wear your dress uniform. That's what it's there for. It would have been a little bizarre if he showed up in street clothes. It would have been a little bizarre if he showed up in fatigues, but people wanted to turn this into a controversy of some sort. And I'm just like, really? This is where you're going. This is where you're going with this. Whew. Yeah. So that was that testimony. And mainly the whole gist of everybody's testimony, with kind of the exception of Sondland, which we're going to get to that in a second, because, oh boy, was that everybody who knew about the call, whether it be they were on the call, they heard from people who were on the call, they knew about the call, everybody expressed concern at that point in time. It's not like they're just now concerned about it. They were expressing concerns about it back in July. So it's not like this was some kind of thing that just cropped up when the whistleblower complaint became public. Apparently, there were a lot of people who had a lot of issues with it for a long time. So, anyway, just kind of establishing the timeline for that. So, getting to one Gordon Sondland, because the last weekly roundup I did, that was right after the David Holmes testimony became public about the phone call between Sondland and Trump, and I was rather curious to see what exactly his testimony would end up looking like. And so he testified on Wednesday, and he was questioned solo for the whole freaking day. It was just a whole damn day of Sondland. But his opening statement, holy shit. This dude came in, sat down, and basically just lit the whole damn thing on fire. He said that he was working at the express direction of the president through Rudy Giuliani, and that everybody knew this was a quid pro quo. He admitted, he said, yep, this is exactly what it looked like. And not only that, Rudy knew, Pompeo knew, Mick Mulvaney knew, Mike Pence knew, everybody knew that that's what this was. And I was just like, holy shit. And this dude, he brought receipts. He showed up with a stack of emails and text messages to prove his point that everybody was in the loop on this. Everybody knew what it was. So this idea that he was some kind of rogue actor, or that Rudy is some kind of rogue actor, or that anybody who was involved in this was somehow just freelancing, he's like, no. This all came from the top, and everybody knew what was up. So I'm sitting there watching that, and it's just like, wow. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, legally speaking, I don't really know what other kind of options he had other than to try to double down on a story that had already been discredited. You can go in there and basically take a blowtorch to everything, or you can try to plead the fifth and get savaged for it. Those, as far as I can tell, were his three options. He chose door number 2, and boy, did he choose door number 2. I was shocked. Like, I kind of expected him to flip, but to just go out guns blazing, like, all right, dude, I will give you props for that. If you're going to go down, you ain't going down by yourself. You're taking everybody with you, and I can appreciate that level of pettiness. He also confirmed that what Trump was concerned about was not so much an actual investigation into corruption, or even an actual investigation into Burisma or the Bidens, but a public announcement of an investigation, which that's important on 2 levels. One, again, it kind of destroys the whole fighting corruption narrative because you don't really care about the investigation. And number 2, how in the world would anybody be able to conduct an investigation into corruption of anybody anywhere by starting out the investigation with an announcement? You don't fucking announce that before you do it. You announce it after it's done. You don't give somebody a heads up and say, hey, guess what, guys? We're going to be investigating you for corruption. Because you know what's going to happen? It's going to be like, okay, cool. Thanks for the heads up. I'm going to go shred some documents and format some hard drives. Yeah, thanks, guys. Would you like to tell me, like, just when and where you're going to show up so I can have my, already edited documents for you and make sure that any incriminating data that there might be is gone? Like, it's just, the whole thing is just dumb. It's stupid, dumb. Of course, it's not going to stop Republicans from defending it because what choice do they have at this point? But just that confirmation that it was the appearance of an investigation versus an actual investigation. And that, yes, there was a lot of pressure put on Zelensky to make a public statement. And that even, and Sondland didn't bring this up, but I saw somebody else bring it up, that Mick Mulvaney point blank said in a press conference that one of the reasons aid was being withheld to Ukraine was to force this announcement. And I think I talked about this at the time, because Mulvaney's stance was, yeah, we did that, get over it. It's like, wait a minute. People just keep admitting to this stuff in broad daylight, But Republicans are still just like, nope, I don't know, guys. There's plenty of plausible other scenarios. It's like Donald Trump stood out on the White House lawn and said that he thought that Ukraine should investigate the Bidens and that China should also investigate the Bidens. You gotta say it like Trump says. You gotta say China. It cracks me up every time he says that. I don't know. Anyway, it's like everybody keeps admitting to this shit, but nobody wants to talk about the fact that everybody keeps admitting to this shit in public. So, anyway, back to Sondland. The topic of David Holmes' testimony came up, and he confirmed that, yes, the phone call happened, and the only thing he kind of refuted was the part about saying that Trump doesn't give a shit about Ukraine. He said he doesn't remember saying that, but that if that's what Holmes says he said, then he'll go with that. Which there was a lot of that, too. There was a lot of kind of, on Sondland's part, kind of trying to split the hair of saying, well, I don't remember saying that, but if David Holmes says I said that, or if Bill Taylor says I said that, then I'm sure I did. It's a way of kind of admitting to something without having to admit to it, which, I mean, at this point, if I was Sondland, I would just spill all the beans and just admit to what the fuck I did. Because, I mean, what's going to happen to this dude, really? Anyway, the thing that came out of this that Republicans are kind of latching onto is there was a question, and I forget what the question was, but it was basically kind of asking about how Sondland knew what Trump wanted as far as Ukraine and what kind of deal. And so Sondland told the story about how he just eventually went to Trump and was like, I keep hearing this, I hear that, like, what do you want? Like, what do you want me to tell these people? And the quote that apparently came from Trump was that, tell them I don't want anything, I don't want quid pro quo, tell Zelensky to do the right thing. Which Republicans and Trump have kind of latched onto the first half of that quote and have conveniently ignored the second half of that quote. Because first of all, you can't say that you don't want anything and then tell somebody what you want. Clearly you want something. You want Zelensky to do the right thing, which any rational person would be able to know even if you say, I don't want quid pro quo, but just tell Zelensky to do the right thing. You know what the hell's being said, people. You know what's being told. You know what Trump thinks is the right thing is an investigation into Burisma / the Bidens and to find this DNC server that doesn't exist. Like that, he's made very clear that he thinks that that's the quote unquote right thing. So just because you said the magic words, I don't want quid pro quo, but then you follow that up with a statement that makes it pretty damn clear what you want. You can't say that you don't want anything. You wanted something, and you were willing to hold up money to get it. Like, that's another thing. Like, nobody disputes the fact that this money was withheld for 55 days. Nobody disputes that. And nobody has given a plausible alternate explanation as to why that happened. Which that kind of blows my mind too, is throughout all of this, the White House nor the State Department has offered any kind of alternate explanation as to why Trump felt the need to unilaterally withhold congressionally approved funds for 55 days. I mean, if there is a good reason, now would be a good time to say it because it would put all of this to bed, but there's not even been any kind of attempt to offer any kind of alternate explanation. That's so wild to me. Like, there's so much information being dumped on everyone that, first of all, it makes this whole thing very hard to follow. Second of all, it makes it hard to sit down and think about basic facts like that. Like, nobody's disputing that this happened. Nobody's disputing the timeline. Like, oh my God. It's almost kind of mind-melting when you think about it. But anyway, back to Sondland's testimony, because I'm not quite done talking about that yet. The way that Republicans, and they didn't do it just with Sondland, they did it with pretty much every witness that came before them. They asked the question, did the president tell you he wanted quid pro quo? which the answer is obviously no. Those words never exited the president's mouth. And thinking back on it, and thinking on that defense, it reminded me a lot of the defense of Michael Cohen, which, if you will remember, Michael Cohen was the guy who was accused of lying to Congress under Trump's direction. And during Michael Cohen's second round of testimony, a lot of Republicans kept coming to back to that kind of same point of saying, did the president ever specifically tell you, Michael, go lie to Congress? And Cohen's response every time he was asked that is like, no, those specific words never came out of his mouth, but he made it very clear to me that that's what he wanted me to do. And so this reminds me a lot of that, where like, no, the exact words did not come out of Trump's mouth, but it was made very clear to the person that he was speaking to what it was that he wanted that person to do. So there's a bit of that hair splitting. And obviously, in Michael Cohen's case, that was enough to kind of get Trump off the hook. The difference is here that you have all these other people who are willing to come in and testify that that is what their understanding of this was too. Not that they were ever specifically told by Trump to go do a quid pro quo, but that it was made clear to them that this is either what you were to do, or this is what was going on, or this is what is happening. So at some point, you reach a critical mass of people where if all of these people come in and say, this was our understanding of what was going on, like at some point, you have to start asking yourself, like, okay, if you've got 10 people who say, yeah, this is what we were led to believe that this is, at some point, you can't discount all of those people. So it's a different situation where maybe if, in like the Michael Cohen case, if there was a bunch of other people who were willing to testify that they understood that Michael Cohen was being told to lie to Congress, that might have turned out a little differently, but that's not how that turned out. But it struck me that Republicans are kind of going down that road again of being willfully ignorant of what has been said and what is being expected because certain words weren't used. So it's kind of interesting. And I don't think it's really going to be enough to save Trump's butt this time. I mean, I'm still, obviously, I know this is not going anywhere in the Senate. I know that. You don't have to tell me. But at some point, you got to start looking sideways at people who, when you have all of this evidence put in front of you and you still want to be like ignorant and stick on this one point, it's like, okay, I see you. But another reason I think the Sondland testimony was really the testimony of the week is that all of the attacks that Republicans used against other witnesses, you couldn't really stick on Sondland. I mean, first of all, obviously, he has firsthand knowledge. He was the guy out there doing the do. He was the guy running point on this whole deal. He was the one shaking the hands and taking the meetings and applying the pressure to try to get Zelensky to give this public announcement. There is nobody with more firsthand knowledge of what was going on the ground than Gordon Sondland, because he was the guy on the ground. He was the one doing it. And you can't make the argument that he's a career diplomat or somebody who's been in the State Department their whole career and has an axe to grind against Trump, because he's not. He got his position as ambassador to the EU, which what does the ambassador to the EU have anything to do with this anyway? But he got his job because he paid for it, basically. So it's not like you can say, oh, this is somebody who just doesn't like Trump and is just mad because Trump's coming in there and he's breaking things up and draining the swamp and doing it all different and new and exciting. It's like, no, he had no experience whatsoever in the diplomatic corps before Trump. In fact, his whole thing is he's a billionaire hotel owner. Does that sound familiar? So you lob that at him. You can't say he's got an axe to grind because, I mean, what, you got an axe to grind against the guy that you gave $1 million to, and then he gave you a job and gave you this responsibility to go make this deal? Like, obviously, at this point, you might be a little, well, regretful that you took this position, and that maybe it would have been best if you kept your $1 million and just stayed running your hotels and living your nice, happy life, instead of having the traipse all over Ukraine and now have to testify in front of Congress to all of the shady shit that you did. Probably regretting that right about now, but you can't really say the guy's got an axe to grind, and you can't call him a never-Trumper, which I cannot express to you how many times the term never-Trumper was said in a congressional hearing. I'm just like, oh my God, the internet has taken control of everything. We have discussed, in the span of this past week of impeachment hearings, we have discussed the concept of a never-Trumper. We've talked about A$AP Rocky. We've talked about the Kardashians. We've talked about tweets. We've talked about texts. I'm just like, what is our world now? What the fuck? It was just mind-melting to watch this stuff, because it's like, we're talking about things that, it's almost kind of like when I was watching the Kavanaugh hearings, and I was like, Jesus Christ, we're talking about farts and drinking games in the middle of a SCOTUS confirmation hearing. Here we are in the middle of impeachment hearings, and we're talking about rappers and reality TV stars and tweets and the concept of never-Trumpers. I'm just like, what is going on? Oh my God, it was nuts. But anyway, for me, I think Sondland's testimony was really the testimony of the week, because, I mean, what? I don't really know what there is left to say after that. Even after his opening statement, I was just like, well, I guess we can just I shut it down for the rest of the day. Like, I really don't know what the hell there is to talk about. But testimony went on. So we had Fiona Hill and David Holmes, which, by the way, David Holmes did end up publicly testifying to the contents of the phone call, which he did affirm that, yes, this is what he heard. Yes, da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, Fiona Hill was the other one that everybody kind of got excited about, because she was one of the senior members on the ground, somebody who had been working with this situation for a very long time, somebody who's very well versed in it, somebody who's very well versed in what's going on in Ukraine, in Russia, with all of that. Somebody who's basically an expert. So the kind of the blockbuster thing that came out of Hill's testimony was that this whole Ukraine plotline of them hacking the DNC server and somehow framing Russia to make Trump look bad. I guess I don't understand this conspiracy theory. It's so wild. Like, it's so convoluted that I'm just like, what? I'm very confused. But anyway, she said that this whole idea is actually Russian propaganda, for in lack of an easier term to explain this, which, ironically enough, it came out this week that back in September, Congress was classified briefed on the fact that this particular story, this Ukraine story, was part of Russian propaganda. So basically, she just accused everybody who pushes that line of pushing Russian propaganda, which, yeah, I mean, if this is a Russian kind of plant idea and you're pushing it, then congratulations, you're pushing Russian propaganda. Anyway, not a big fan of Sondland. She wasn't. No, not a fan. In fact, she said that he was there on a domestic political errand, which is in a way of insinuating that this was not in the interest of Ukraine, but in the interest of the U.S. and a specific person inside the U.S. But yeah, making the point that this was nothing that anybody thought was going to benefit Ukraine in any way other than them getting their military aid. So, all right, testimony done, in the bag, at least for the House Intelligence Committee. A couple of other things that kind of came out of this week not directly related to any of the testimony, but just a testimony adjacent. And that is Republicans trying to also make a case that the words keep changing, that somehow, because we went from quid pro quo to extortion to bribery, that Democrats just can't quite figure out what they want to charge Trump with. And it's like, okay, first of all those three things are synonyms. You can use them interchangeably. Honestly, if I was picking one, I'd go with extortion. But allegedly, how this whole thing came down is apparently Democrats did some polling and realized that people don't know what quid pro quo means, which have people not seen Austin Powers ever? Do people not know what quid pro quo means? But apparently they don't. So they had to find a different thing to call it in order to convey to people who do not know what quid pro quo is what exactly it is that they're accusing the president of. So Republicans tried to make this into a talking point that is really just stupid. Like so much of what came out of the Republican camp this week is just dumb, just really dumb. But like I said, where else are they going to go with this? Like there's nothing that they can really say on the substance. So you got to attack either the messengers or the message, because there's nothing you can say about the facts that were said this week. Like there's just, I don't know what to do after this week. But obviously testimony ended without hearing from certain people who were invited. People like Rudy Giuliani, like Mick Mulvaney, like Mike Pompeo. I don't know if they ever invited Pence exactly, but I mean, I'm sure if he wanted to testify, they would make room for him. But here's my thing, and here's what I'm not entirely understanding from Trump's perspective. If I had people like Giuliani, or like Mick Mulvaney, or like Mike Pompeo, or anybody else who had firsthand knowledge that could possibly counter the storyline being put forth by all of these other witnesses, why in God's name would you keep those people from testifying? That makes no sense to me. And the whole reason that these people aren't testifying is because the White House has told them no. And in fact, it kind of came out this week during the impeachment hearings. Not that it was kind of sort of public knowledge, but kind of became more so public knowledge, especially with the Sondland testimony, which is that the State Department, at the request of the White House, is withholding certain documents and is not allowing people access to them, not allowing the Intelligence Committee access to them. One of the reasons that Sondland put forth for not having, in his words, the most perfect testimony the first time around was that he was asking for access to certain documents from the State Department, and he was being denied access to them. Apparently, I guess he was trying to refresh his memory or go over what happened, but he was being denied access to these documents. And so I'm wondering if there's going to be an obstruction charge put in the articles of impeachment. I mean, if you're directing people to not testify and you're directing the State Department to not release certain documents, that's kind of obstruction-y. That's actually really obstruction-y. But back to my original point. I mean, at this point, I don't see how, at the very, 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 very least, Giuliani makes it through this without having to testify. Like, I don't, especially after the Sondland testimony. I mean, that was a direct accusation from somebody who was in a position to know that all of these people knew what was going on. Like, that's a direct accusation. I don't know how you don't respond to that. I mean, you're being accused of being part of a conspiracy to withhold aid to a country in order to elicit the announcement of an investigation. If that is not the truth of the matter, wouldn't you want to testify? Like, wouldn't you be like, no, that's not what happened. Let me come tell you what happened. But that's not happening. I'm just like, I don't entirely know what to make of that either. But I'll be very, very interested to see kind of how this goes down, especially in the Senate. But at this point, here is the timeline going forward for impeachment phase 3, I suppose we can call that now. So over the Thanksgiving break, over this next week, House Intelligence Committee is going to write up a report, hand it over to the House Judiciary Committee, where they will read it over. They are free to hold their own hearings, which at this point, I don't really know what or even if those would be a thing. Like, I'm not entirely sure what there is left to say at this point, unless Judiciary wants to take a crack at subpoenaing either Giuliani or Mulvaney or Pompeo or Pence or anybody else. If they want to even try to subpoena Trump, I suppose they could. But as far as additional testimony, I don't really know what there would be left to testify. So anyway, House Judiciary Committee will do whatever they're going to do, and then they will, amongst themselves, write up the articles of impeachment, present them, and then there will be, obviously, debate on those, and then there will be a House floor vote. I am assuming that they want to get all of this done before Christmas break, with the idea that once you come back from Christmas break at the beginning of 2020, the Senate would then take it up, and then they would do the impeachment trial. So a lot of things are happening very fast. And like, that's kind of a very compressed timeline, especially since Thanksgiving is so late this year. It's going to be a tight squeeze. And like I said, I don't know what Judiciary is going to do as far as a hearing, but I mean, obviously I would think you would have to have at least a week of whatever in the House, the full House, before the floor vote. So I don't know. We'll see how that ends up shaking down, but that is it. That is the week in impeachment news. There was a lot of news, and a lot to take in. But ultimately, my summation is, after seeing all this testimony, after hearing what all these people have had to say over the past 2 weeks, I don't know how you really logically deny that this happened the way that the whistleblower says it happened, that military aid was withheld from Ukraine for Trump's own personal reasons. Because, I mean, you can't even really make an argument that any of this was on national security grounds either. Like, what national security issue is it to try to investigate either this bizarre conspiracy theory about a DNC server or investigating Hunter Biden and Burisma? Like, where does this at all tie to, like, national security? And that would be the only thing that you could possibly argue for the president unilaterally withholding congressional funds that were approved by Congress to go to Ukraine. And there's no there. Honestly, there has been no good reason put forth for Trump doing that. And for that alone, like, I don't see how this is an abuse of power. I don't see how this isn't an impeachable offense. I know he probably won't be impeached for it. I am aware of that. But I don't know how you make the argument that that's not an impeachable offense. I mean, abuse of power is pretty clear. I mean, yeah. Bribery is actually in the Constitution as an impeachable offense. So anyway, we shall see what ends up happening with that once we get back from Thanksgiving. The other sneaky thing that happened this week that kind of happened while everybody was paying attention to the other two big things going on is that those sneaky fuckers in Congress snuck through a renewal of the Patriot Act. And they did it on yet another stopgap spending bill, which kill me now. Stop it. Stop doing stopgap spending bills. Let the government shut down. Shut it down. Come on, we can have Libertarian Christmas again. It was fun last time, remember? But no, not only did we get a temporary spending bill, they snuck in renewal of the Patriot Act on the back of it, which, against Justin Amash's continued howling and screaming and crying on Twitter about it, of course it passed. Of course it fucking did. They knew what the hell they were doing putting it on the spending bill. And it's just like, God damn it, guys. But it's just a reminder that throughout all of this, throughout watching the impeachment hearings, throughout watching these Democratic debates, remember, these people don't give a fuck about you. They don't care. They do not give a fuck. And that's kind of really the takeaway that should come from all of this, is that everybody in government sucks. They all suck. Let's get rid of all of them. Why not? But anyway, just want to let you guys know that they renewed the Patriot Act. They snuck it in when nobody was looking. I see you. I was looking. But at this point, I think we've gone on long enough about the past week, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. As always, if you did make it this far, thank you for listening. And if you do like this, please rate, comment, and subscribe. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and on my Patreon page. Take care, and until next time.